you take and put the take snapshots of various hazards, little write-up underneath, and you put them on the bulletin boards at each station. That way, if there's someone he's back from college, and he hasn't had a chance to go out, but he can take a look and then ask someone who has been there a question. Absolutely. No, there's actually a whole standard on pre-planning, which is what we're trying to do. We're trying to get in there before there's an emergency. But again, it's pretty much flows. It's a give and take depending on what's going on that day. Sometimes you may have something scheduled and life takes over and you're at a fire or EMS and you don't get it that day, so you would just try to reschedule it. But I'd also tell you, they're not there to be inspectors. They're there to learn to look at risks that could come to them or understand how to better move patients or move people out of that space.
Again, it was driven to get interagency working together within the community.
Makes a ton of sense.
But did you have any indication that this isn't already happening informally? I know a lot of these people. I see them frequently talking with each other or dropping by. It seems to me that much of this is happening informally now.
I think informally it is, and I think that's a great point. We're just trying to formalize it up a little bit.
But when Dick Morris goes out to inspect a new development, a new build, is he bringing and inviting and scheduling the fire to go out with him
Or
to do
inviting,
that?
yeah.
That's your point.
Mm-hmm.
Is working
well, I think
better together, right?
that follows what Mr. Solano was suggesting: is should there be record keeping of this?
Oh yeah, yes, I'm sure.
For insurance purposes. Okay. Well, on page 39, you have in section 4.5, you have a list of the potential chemical hazards.
Yes, ma'am.
And I noticed that on the list is not the National Guard camp, which is located off Boston Post Road, which I believe has quite a few hazardous materials as well. But that's really not my point. Did you actually go to any of these sites and observe these, or are these just from paper records?
Yeah, these were submitted to us by the various agencies that said that these items were within the community.
So they aren't in here as a potential cause for alarm or something needs to be done in regards to that?
What they're there for is to quantify the risk that the departments are protecting within the community, so that you understand as a community that these guys don't just respond to structure fires, that there's hazardous materials embedded in the community in these specific types of facilities, and that when they get there, it might not just be a structure fire, it may be a hazardous material event, and they need to be equipped and trained to deal with it.
I noticed also in the report that there was very little mention of the Niantic substation. So I realize that they're part of the Niantic Fire Department, it's just a substation, but did anything in particular strike you from regarding that structure of having the substation out there? Anything?
Right. The location for the substation is absolutely essential. We thought the substation was in pretty good shape. It needed some touch-ups. It needed some mechanical help. Because it's been around for a little while. And again, that's why we made the recommendation for a committee to go in there, take a look at it, and say, hey, listen, we need to look at this. This needs to be fixed. Those kind of things.
One of your big points here was on the volunteers and the training. Are you aware of any model programs around the country that we might use as a starting point?
There's a ton of them. That you can go to the Connecticut Fire Academy, to their bookstore, and they'll give you, there's books in there on how to do weekly, monthly drills. There's a ton of stuff on the internet. I should tell you that it's more of a coordination issue. The group that you have here is doing good training. Mm-hmm. It's a pocket and a pocket, and maybe if they get a chance to go. So that's what we're trying to say, is that just needs to be all coordinated together.
Well, I think that in part is due to the fact that we have, for lack of a better term, really minimal staffing. And they're busy maintaining the equipment. When I drive by, I see them almost every day with the doors open. They're out polishing the engines, doing maintenance work. I think.
And we're not trying to take away anything from that. Not at all. They do a great job. That's not our intent. Our intent, though, is as important as the readiness factor, there needs to be a hands-on factor. There needs to be some practice for doing the things we call high-risk, low-frequency. And if we don't practice that and build that muscle memory, then we could have a problem.
Can I follow up on that?
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, you have a lot of the Flanders and INEC guys and girls going to the same scene all the time, working together.
Yes.
But the training isn't done together.
Yes.
If you had training together, it may be a little more efficient.
And
Is
more
that what you're saying?
seamless. Yes.
Okay.
That's what I'm trying to say.
Yep.
Okay. On page 73, section 10.1, the protection, recommendation number 5, the town of East Lyme should formally recognize and designate the fire and emergency medical responders. Are you suggesting that, I'm not quite sure where that's going, what the recommendation
That is
section.
literally just a resolution saying that these are our guys and this is what they're going to do for us. It covers you. You probably have that in an insurance document someplace, but we couldn't find a public document, a town of East Lyme document that said that the Flanders and Niantic Fire Department are our fire department and our EMS providers. I'm sure there is on some medical paperwork that you've submitted for the OEMS. I'm sure there is probably on some insurance paperwork, but we couldn't find, and I may be wrong, but we couldn't find a document that said, these are our guys. And normally what happens is in the structure and creation of those departments, particularly when you start bringing in career staff and all that, there needs to be an overarching thing saying, this is our department, and
Right.
we're going to support it.
Okay.
And where would that, are you suggesting a personnel file that's online, or?
Would be an ordinance? I mean,
Usually it's just an ordinance,
An ordinance or
a
a
resolution.
Town charter.
Usually it actually is in the town charter.
Yeah.
It is in the town charter, yes.
No, I said it usually
Should
is.
be.
I didn't
I
see.
believe it is.
Oh, we missed it then.
Well, no, if there's something in there, it's outdated because it definitely doesn't describe the situation as you have it today.
We'll review that.
Right.
Yeah,
Well,
we'll
we
review that.
we probably can do that.
That would be
by
the
ordinance.
perfect, I know charter revisions are difficult, but
Yeah.
ultimately that'd be a great place for it, but it could be a resolution until, I don't know what you use.
Ordinances.
It could be an ordinance to get you to do the next
Right.
one.
Right.
Okay.
Thank
Okay.
you. I'll yield the floor.
Kevin? You need a microphone?
Yeah, I'll need them.
Thank you, Roseanne. Question, I don't know if you or the chiefs can answer this. Are the professionals at Flanders cross-trained in operating the vehicles at Niantic Fire Department?
Let me just make a little correction. The career staff at the stations, that's just a fireman thing.
Okay.
So that, and some are and some aren't. Again, this is another one of those things where something bad happens and suddenly we're scrambling and we need to get someone to cover a day or whatever. There are some folks that are qualified from Niantic up in Flanders. There's some people up there that are down here, but again, it's not across the board. Not that we're aware of.
Okay. Same thing, is there a uniform A&O manual for both departments, or is there a separate one, an administrative and operations manual?
No, that's part of the problem. There's two sets of bylaws. And they're similar in many ways, but they're... I'm going to defer for 1 second. Let me just double check your last question. On career staff, are they qualified on both stations? Some are. Just like I said, okay. I just want to make sure I had that right.
Okay.
Okay, I liked what you brought up about, no complaints. That's one thing I don't think any of us ever hear in town is a complaint about responses. If you call 911, I think there's a feeling that you're getting quality and as prompt a response as possible. I like what you talk about is keeping two departments. But I also think you have had some good points here. But I also looked at when the police department approached Mr. Nickerson about a year and a half ago about wanting to go independent. we made, they were the stakeholders. They're the ones that were involved in doing everything. It was the sergeants that got together. So I would hope that as we move forward, or if we do move forward this at some point in time, that it's the stakeholders, the firemen, the chiefs, and the departments that sit down together to come up with the solutions, because it's better to get their input. They're the ones that are out there all the time. Because as you pointed out, I think as time goes on, especially with Costco potentially coming, with Gateway, I think everyone knows that if you have someone on the third floor that has a medical problem, there's no elevator to get you up there. They have to walk up 3 flights of stairs. My son's on the third floor.
Worst part is the walk down.
Well, my son's on the third floor, and a couple of times when I've gotten up there, I thought I might have to call for help, but I'm only joking. I'm only joking.
Wow.
Well, I think, and that's one of our primary points here is absolutely the more it needs to be a team. It needs to be a team operation. I agree 100%. We agree 100%.
And I like what you mentioned about the red phone versus computer. I think those are all great ideas, but I think it's our job to ask the questions. It's when the time comes to look forward to going ahead, getting the input from the people that go out on the calls on a regular basis, or the dispatch. Those are the ones we need to get input from, because I think there is always, like anything else that everyone would agree, there's always room to make things better. One thing I'd like to also look at, too, is we've always talked about the state, how many of our calls at Flanders wind up tying our guys up on the highway for hours on end. That's just the reality of life. Same thing with calls to the prison. I'm sure one of the reasons why we had a drop-off in some calls for EMS could be you're not going to probably Gates anymore, because that's no longer used. But we do have a lot of calls to York and so forth like that. I know that.
There's some other opportunities there, too, that we didn't put in the report, is for, on the highway, is to go look at the collecting through the insurance of the spiller, all the folks involved in the accident. That's a whole big picture. That's a whole nother conversation, but that's an opportunity for an income stream. First Selectman knows, in your homeowners and in your car, many policies pay for emergency response and cleanup. It's rarely used. It's rarely collected on, because it's a whole infrastructure you have to build up for that process for billing and collecting those funds. But there are many communities that have done that.
And I also liked about what you mentioned about, a dialogue needs to be started with the ambulance service, and not to resolve it, tomorrow or in the next, several months, but a dialogue to where that equation is developed, because they provide a great service to the town, an essential service, just like the firemen do. But, to open up that dialogue. That's really all the comments I have.
Thanks, Mr. Siri. Mr. Cunningham, anything to add?
Well, I have a few questions.
Sure, absolutely. Make sure you have
Yeah.
some microphone time here.
Getting back to the red phone and CAD system, you had mentioned in your comments that the town of East Lyme already has some facility with that with respect to our police department. Do you happen to know, is that something new that we've had to acquire because of the recent formation of the independent police
No.
force? Or we've had this?
My understanding is that, because that's how we got a lot of our information, is through the computer-aided dispatch. There should be, that's how we got all the data, or most of the data. Not
Those
all
graphs that were developed?
All that came out of your computer. Normally, there's another portion of that that says, if you have this type of emergency, send this, this, and this. So the dispatcher doesn't have to ask permission unless it's a bizarre call. They just say, okay, boop, 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 and they send it. So that takes time off. And then whether you're in your car or in the station, then you hear where you're going, so everything speeds up. That's what we're suggesting.
So we already have that capability, and what that does is it reduces the response time related to that chart that you were showing.
Yes, it reduces the lead time. There's turnout time. There's in the standard, there's receiving the call.
Mm-hmm.
You have time to dispatch the call, and then you have time for turnout, which is either the folks that are on duty getting dressed or the folks coming from home to get a vehicle, and then there's response time, and then there's on-scene time. So there's multiple pieces here. And again, time being what it is, any time we can take and shrink that number.
Right.
Whether it's, if you have no one at the station or you have someone at the station, that's going to shrink it because they're there. Having to communicate with the dispatch center or not communicate and give direction, if it's agreed upon, planned out, and everybody says this is what we're going to do, then it's one step ahead. You're not reinventing it every single time.
And that's that critical phase on your curve before you get to the flashover.
Exactly.
The other thing I was wondering about, I just lost it. Here, the red phone. Go to someone else and I'll come back. I had a question I was formulating.
Mr. Dago?
I don't have any questions at this time, but just a couple comments. I want to thank you for these recommendations and appreciate that you interviewed members of the 4 professional organizations and some of the town organizations. And I'm just encouraged that this is a starting point, because there's nothing more important than providing the service that is provided, but also providing the men and women that provide that service with what they need to do their job and do it safely and as quickly and as expeditiously as possible. I've had the unfortunate, although fortunate, opportunity personally to have members of the town's ambulance and fire department treat me for a spinal injury and get me to the hospital before I get into a helicopter to go have surgery. And I'll, forever be grateful for how they treated and took care of me during that occurrence. Regarding your recommendation for touring new facilities or facilities that may have a higher percentage of hazardous material or processes, professional experience, where it's invaluable for someone responding to an emergency to understand what kind of door they're walking into and what kind of turns they need to take and what they're going to face. You can't keep it up to speed 100% of the time. But in this case, the event I was involved with required, when the federal firefighters were exhausted fighting a fire, it took firefighters from 2 states away, above and beyond the local volunteers and fire companies, to be able to, fight that fire for hours. And knowing what you're dealing with is key to the safety of the people responding. So I wholeheartedly endorse that. It may take time, but if you don't know, it's tough to go. And these men go sometimes when they don't know because it's their job and duty. But if we can get them to the point where they know, we're doing them a service just like they're doing us a service. So I just encourage everybody involved here in the town, the citizens, the Board of Finance, ourselves, members of all 4 professional companies, to look at this as an opportunity to improve, not as an opportunity for change. This is to improve, and hopefully we can have some good dialogue going forward, and we can end up with, some changes that benefit us all. So thank you, I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Dago. Did you catch?
Yeah, I wanted to get back to the volunteer recruitment. It won't be too long.
Yeah.
Okay.
All night.
You said there were a wide variety of options to enhance and make it attractive for people to be volunteers. And are these geared more towards the morale of the volunteers and making it something attractive that an organization you'd want to join as opposed to some other civic group? Or is it more geared towards proficiency and safety in the performance of their duties? It's
actually interesting. The more time we spend on the proficiency and safety, the better the morale is and the better the function is. I would tell you that it's a little bit of encompassing of everything. The primary problem I see is this. We're competing with every other organization there is, whether it's sportsmen's clubs to fishing clubs to, again, the Lions, the Kiwanis, whatever you have, Little League, softball, lacrosse, whatever you do, your kid wants to go do that, or you want to go do that, and you're being tugged and trying to figure out how you're going to juggle all this up. The best programs empower, support, and make positive, good things happen for those people, and then those people hang around and bring more people with them. But it's very, very hard, and there's very, very few companies that are thriving where they don't have anybody on during the day and they're 100% volunteer. There's very few companies that only have 1 or 2 people on during the day and are thriving with the rest of the group. They're far and in between. And it's this magical mix, and I wish I knew it because I struggled the same thing. I have very few volunteers. I try very hard. We send them to school, and then they get hired by somebody else, and they're gone, or I hire them. But there's this difficult juggling act that takes place. It's everything from having a quality equipment, good gear, good training, good support from the community, whether that's financial, whether that's employee of the month kind of stuff. All those kind of things, that all plays into this magic. The State Fire Chiefs Association successfully has gotten on their 3rd grant, and they've been running workshops on what's that magic. They've got experts from all over the country coming. Those opportunities are there for training for the leadership, but it's literally in some places it's monthly dinners. In other places it's gear. In other places it's financial incentives. And that's the difficult part is I wish I could tell you that this is going to work every place, and it just doesn't work that way. It's all custom.
Some departments have a incentive program that's like a retirement for the volunteers, that after you've been a member for so many years, you become vested in it, and the more you stay active, the more of a contribution they put into it, so it grows with time. And what they do is they put performance requirements on that, so these guys know that if they're going to stay active, they have to meet some performance requirement for that particular year to be judged active and get another increment into their incentive plan. So, I mean, there are a lot of things out there. We didn't list them because we think it is a dynamic situation where you want to sit down as a community and ask yourself what's going to be best that will work with the types of volunteers, because every fire department has a different personality. Flanders is different than Niantic. Niantic is different than Flanders. The fire marshal's office is different than the other two. So they have their different personalities, and they all have to come together and work that out and come up and champion the cause.
I'll give you one thing that I know, and I'm not suggesting you end it by any means. We have a friend of ours who has a waiting list to get into his firehouse. JT's got 100 members?
Yeah, I don't know what their numbers
Solid 100 members, waiting list to get in. They do not put on a Band-Aid. They do not leave that station unless it's a fire or a rescue. They leave that to a third party, to a volunteer organization that does that. So they're not getting up 4 times a night. They're not going out 8 times a day. So there's that. So you have to find that right leverage, that right connection with the folks that you need to do for the services you want to have done, and they do a great job at. And we just got to figure out how to support that force.
Thank you.
Can I follow up on that?
Sure.
Because that was going to be my question. So I thought that was a really interesting discussion about the volunteers. I always find it fascinating that we're asking people to volunteer to put out fires, but we're also asking them to volunteer to raise money, these same people, and to go recruiting and stuff like that. And it's a lot to ask upon a volunteer, so I was glad to hear that. Can you give me an example of what are we doing right now? I know that we provide uniforms, and we should, to our volunteers. What we're doing now, and elaborate a little bit more on what other departments are doing to support the volunteers, to help to get more people. You mentioned some great examples. I know some departments offer some sort of pension.
We call that a length of service awards program, a LOSAP. Usually you have to have some number of quarters, or some, just like vested, like anything else. There's some kind of participation benchmark that you need to get qualified for that quarter. Let me just back up and say that a lot of the stuff that the company members are getting is from the ambulance, not necessarily from the town. Okay. They're getting some stuff from the town, but a lot of that, this goes back to that other conversation. The fuel cards, the turnout gear, The EMS jackets, all of that's coming out of the EMS, coming out of the ambulance. It's not coming out of the community. So I don't want you to, I need to drive that home so everybody understands that it's working. It's this big melting pot, but it's two different things. Training, allowing people to go to classes, hosting classes, dinners, having a regular dinner night. Some departments set up schedules where if you're an officer in the department, you need to give so many hours, and that gives you some responsibility.
But as a town, what could we do to help them? And maybe we ask the two fire departments, give us your suggestions. What could the town do to help you with your volunteer efforts, your recruiting, and
yeah, exactly. It goes back to our recommendation. You all need to get together, and they need to come to you and say, what in our community with our demographic and our kids and our tax base and our professional base and all this other stuff, these are the things that we think would help. And then you have to come back and say to them as, well, we can afford this, this, and this, but we can't afford that.
Did you find that it was everyone's going down what we're hearing?
Yeah.
Is it a retention issue or is it a recruitment issue?
Yes.
Or both?
Yes.
Of course.
It's both.
It's both.
Okay.
Because here's firefighter A, firefighter EMT A is an active firefighter, right? And he starts getting tired, or she starts getting tired. There's nobody here in the wings. There's no journeyman or person that's coming in behind them to learn from that person, so that when that person says, you know what, I can't get up tonight, I'm just exhausted, somebody else will get that. There needs to be
some burnout.
Yeah, and what happens is, what we saw from the reports, we have the same people going to a lot of the calls.
Sure,
we may
you do.
have people
Yep.
on a roster, but we don't have that whole set. So we've got to entice this other group, and we got to have a feeder system that brings in. I know Joe's done a lot of work. From Nyack has done a lot of work trying to with the high school, trying to get a junior program going or get some incentive going. But again, it's not a community-wide part. I know the guys from Flanders have been to the high school during the open house, trying to, again, sell that idea. We got to get them before they get sports and girls, cars and girls. Once that happens, it's all over. So we have to get them into the system and support them, so that because, listen, you get tired. And if you're doing your regular work all day and then you're spending up half the night doing ambulance calls, it's tired to go back the next day. And when you're your age, it's not as hard as when you're my age. I don't want to get up in the middle of the night 3 times.
Okay. Just one more question, if you don't mind. You mentioned the zoning and planning.
Yes.
Now, I come from zoning, so we know that was never really a requirement, but the fire marshal would always provide us like a report of this is, radius of curves for fire trucks. So is that already being done in a different capacity?
There are standards that are out there. Unfortunately, in the state of Connecticut, we did not adopt the standards that talked about minimum fire flows and standby water.
So are you targeting that? Not necessarily something's being done. Obviously, we have the fire marshal.
Yeah.
You're saying more water flows.
Right. John's concern and our concern, I should say, is that if there's no hydrant there, then we need to put something on site that these folks can suck the water out of the ground and pump it to the fire.
So are you talking about more stations where like ponds and stuff like that, where they can start filling up?
Exactly.
Yes,
That's what we're talking about.
all the above.
Designated sources of water.
And you could put that into your regulations.
Okay. Okay.
I hope that helps.
Yep.